100%.
You're calling from a 513 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Gabe from Ohio.
Hey, Gabe, what's going on?
Hey, yeah, I was just I was thinking about what you guys were talking about yesterday with regards to Elizabeth Warren, whether she was going to run and whether that'd be a good thing or not. That was actually kind of concerning to me as a longtime listener to you guys. And
What
just
about
to
it?
say just to say who I am. I'm a self-professed, I guess, communist from the Frankfurt School who believes in kind of cyber communism as the way forward. And I feel like if you support Elizabeth Warren, who herself declares herself as hey, I'm a capitalist, is like the wrong way to kind of think about the approach of what needs to be done going kind of further into the future as to our kind of movement.
Let me just...
And it kind of...
Yeah. I mean, I'm not to interrupt you, but can I just do a little placeholding here? At least as far as everybody here, and actually Sam too, the number one preference, as far as I understand, is definitely Bernie Sanders. So...
Oh, absolutely,
that's clear. I guess the other thing is that, I don't know, man, like when you're talking about a presidential race and you're talking about the context of the shifting nature of American politics and what's happening inside the Democratic Party, there's still no question that Elizabeth Warren is leagues ahead of other choices that are in the field. So, and I also, like, if your new sort of metric for a presidential candidate is whether they identify as anti-capitalist, I don't think we're there yet in this process.
That's why I want to get into specific. That's why I want to get into specifically.
Okay.
Because the reform movement must stay entirely free of capitalist influence, and the reason why is because, and I guess the perfect way to see where you guys are in terms of reading of the history of how we got here in terms of your awareness of, let's say, like monopoly capitalism. Would you say that the New Deal during the FDR period of time was sustainable from an economic standpoint?
Sustainable from an economic standpoint? What do you mean specifically by that?
Yeah, so one of the main economic drivers for success in an economy is capital investment. And one of the things that is persistent in a monopoly capitalism that kind of emerged in the late 1800s to early 19th century was this kind of persistent stagnation within the economy and the need for this unending growth, this persistent growth.
Okay, but I'm sorry, but just stay on the New Deal. Yeah. So are you saying that it wouldn't be sustainable ecologically or economically?
Economically, because you're still working within the capitalist structure that needs continuous growth because of the business cycle.
Okay.
And when you have this kind of
Okay, I understand. So draw the link to Elizabeth Warren and what your concern is now.
Yeah. So you got to imagine, let's say Elizabeth Warren gets in, she's a capitalist, she wants to work within the system. If any kind of labor, and let's say she gets labor behind her to support her, any laborist government to rise to any kind of political preeminence is their basic dissolution would be almost certain. So I just don't know why you would support someone who's inevitably going to fail.
I don't. This is way too theological for me. So
I'm following this so far.
I guess the reality is as far, and then jump in a second, Jamie. But like, I don't know. Like, first of all, the New Deal, for all of its flaws that we could endlessly catalog and critique, and some of them are important to critique and understand, and some of them are pretty contextual, benefited tens of millions of people, actually more, because it still benefits people today. There's literally still programs that have people in significantly improved material
Look
conditions.
at the makeup of the federal workforce.
Look at the makeup of the federal workforce. Look at Social Security. I mean, you know, all of the vital social programs that came out of that time, as well as some advancements in labor rights. So rural electrification. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. Now, you have a moment now where I think if you were to say, is what Elizabeth Warren is proposing, is it the sort of broader democratization of the economy that someone like me would both ideologically want and think is necessary in the long term? No. Although undoubtedly what she's pushing for, even like as an example with the putting workers on boards, would start to really significantly reconfigure people's expectation sets and also open up a whole new horizon of possibility in policy. And that's a good thing, inevitably. And also, by the way, in terms of like negotiating with capitalism and dealing with capitalism, you know that the same applies to Bernie Sanders. Like, I agree that Bernie Sanders has more of a class analysis, and I think he really is more of like a Euro social democrat than Elizabeth Warren, which I certainly prefer. But there's no, there's no like communist option here. And also, if we're being real, we don't even know what that even means. We can point to specific successes in specific areas, whether it be Sweden or Cuba in certain areas. There's also a lot of failures, and we still don't know what the model is. So I just...
The academic David Harvey talked about that, the failure of the left being the inadequacy to effectually paint the picture of what that would look like. But there's a lot of people coming up with new ideas. But
I know that, but we don't...
You kind of have to find them.
Yeah, I know. But in terms of like actual policy, but let Jamie talk.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So,
hey, Jamie.
Hi. So I agree with you in part. I think, capitalism is not sustainable. It needs to end. It's going to end, probably. It's going to be crushed under the weight of its own contradictions, and the left needs to be prepared. So when this crisis does happen, we can transition to a socialist society and not the horrible neo-feudalist society that we seem to be sliding towards right now, and that we would certainly slide into if the crisis came today, which is why I'm not an accelerationist. If anything, I'm a decelerationist, because I've spent enough time on the left to know that we are not even close to ready for that. Right. So capitalism needs to end. That said, does this wave of social democracy and social democracy within bourgeois electoral politics, does that move us closer to being ready? Does it move us closer? Does this help us build a popular front? And I think it's too early to tell still. I'm skeptical of it for a lot of different reasons. I think I have a more overarching view of how change happens throughout history. Like, we got the New Deal, not because FDR was nice and gave it to us, but because there was massive unrest and popular uprisings, and the ruling class was scared that they were going to lose everything. So in that way, we got reforms as concessions.
That's true, but there was also a part of the ruling class that wanted to instigate a military coup because they were so pissed at what FDR was doing. Yeah,
it wasn't easy. It was a very tricky compromise that he brokered.
Yeah, but it's right. And so I agree. Of course it wouldn't have happened without a huge amount of popular
I gotta give him some credit. But I think one mistake that people make today on the social democratic left is they see the reforms as the horizon. Whereas if you want even these kinds of fairly mild reforms, you need to have a horizon that is much, much farther. And you get these reforms as concessions.
The reforms expand the horizon.
Well, that's the idea. And also, I'm open to the arguments for the simple reason that nothing has worked yet to bring about lasting global socialism. So in that way, I'm sort of agnostic on electoralism. I will say, at least the idea is, when the DSA, for example, works with candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like Bernie Sanders, they create an opening to talk about class politics in the mainstream in a way that we have not seen in decades and decades, and sort of empower people to ask for more. We also build our base that way. once people get interested in class politics, maybe they join an organization, maybe they just form a union at their workplace, maybe they just become active in their communities. So beyond any actual reforms that we might get from these politicians, which I think might be fairly minimal, but we'll see. That's the idea. That's what we're getting out of it. And I think it certainly couldn't hurt.
What's
right?
your background? What's your background, Gabe, in terms of like class or money?
Yeah, so like in regards to like awareness, education.
No, just in terms of like where you're coming from. I mean, not to like put you on the spot. I mean, don't say more than you feel comfortable with. But did you say like pretty comfortable, pretty? No, just like how did you grow up? Were you pretty well off, or was it tougher? What was it like?
I would say lower middle class, public schools, state colleges, law school, MBA.
You have a law school and an MBA.
A lot of student loans.
I guess partially what comes up for me in these conversations is, and part of the reason I can never make it too abstract is because and obviously, relatively speaking, like countless people have been through way more than like me, and I'm not putting stuff out there in some type of big melodramatic way, but it's like, if you even know the difference in a very mundane level, something that's not, we're going to sort of philosophize and have grand narratives about this and that, but like the difference between the funding of like home heating assistance or not is the difference between whether your family has heating or not in 15-degree weather or not. It also makes for, conversations that could skip over the serious and significant differences in people's lives right now, even with a difference between, my God, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, let alone what Elizabeth Warren is putting on the table. So that's part of why I get frustrated with these conversations. I just can't be so abstracted. And number two, I think the idea that you wouldn't see general momentum towards the left, even just in terms of Bernie Sanders running a social democratic campaign, has skyrocketed, like Jamie was saying, the interest in every variety of sort of class politics and analysis possible. And the fact that we're even in a position where there's some sort of debate and sense of like, not just, oh my God, will any mildly progressive person run for president? It's actually like there's a philosophical difference that could be at stake in the Democratic Party. It might seem small, but in the sweep of at least modern political history, those are huge shifts.
Well, it's
and
hard,
those
though.
are really significant. That's not hard. That isn't disputable.
It is hard.
Could I interrupt? Oh, sorry.
Can I just finish this?
I was just going to say. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Like what we've seen in the past is we have all this great populist left energy, and it gets subsumed by the Democratic Party. Unions became completely subsumed by the Democratic Party and returns to a sort of stabilizing force in society when we should be pushing
But that's
even
another
further.
challenge that we're all going to have to deal with, because
And that's never going away.
That's never going away.
Yeah,
Because
I
the
know.
inclination of most people, and it makes total sense, like most union people are like, wow, we have really good deals and we enjoy living American middle-class lives. Most people are not thinking about revolution and this and that.
Well,
most people are trying to enjoy themselves. And that's another thing in terms of meeting people where they are in reality, which is really important.
Well,
I guess
mean, the work of socialism is not just to do what the majority wants consciously right in this moment, right? Because if you put socialism to a vote right now, it would definitely lose. It's way more. It's way more than that.
It's more than that, but it's a very subtle interplay process. Like I'm not ever going to be.
I'm about moving resources to where they should go.
Yeah, move resources where they should go. And I do not consider, I for all my jokes, I don't consider myself a vanguardist. I think there's a lot of problems with that perspective.
I mean, if
Gabe,
you want an example.
Well,
okay.
That's the fundamental problem, is that
Then give your example.
It's good to talk about the distinction of classes, but you, at the same time, you have to talk about the economic side of monopoly capitalism and stagnation. Like, those terms on your show and on these politicians are not discussed. Stagnation is a persistent problem that requires consistent growth in the business cycle to succeed. If you want real economic growth in regards to employment and all that, you need capital investment. You need things like not just a couple people from the labor class on these boards. You need like half the board to be consisting of labor in order to push through these capital investments.
Well, that's actually very close to what she's proposing. But also the other thing about that, from any type of perspective, what that runs up against is the ecological limits of what literally can be done. And that's another thing.
Which is not just a problem for capitalists.
Which is not just a problem for capitalists. There has been no society in our world. Some have done better than others, but even the ones that are the most advanced still rely on very extractive supply chains. So, and also the next horizon you're talking about of where this like next fusion of untapped primitive accumulation is going to come through like a neo-colonialism in Africa, which we see right now. So, that's and that's a very big issue. Again, definitely not going to be relatively improved by being concerned about what Elizabeth Warren is putting on the table.
I don't think any of these things necessarily have to conflict, right? Like it is really important for people to understand that capitalism is not a sustainable system, right? We are, according to Marxist economists, I don't know that much about bourgeois economics, so I probably can't argue that. But according to Marxist economists, and I believe them, we are in a crisis of profitability and have been since the 1970s. Stagflation was not supposed to happen, right? Bourgeois economists did not understand it at all, and they had to turn to the Marxists to explain what the hell was happening.
Yeah, like economics.
I mean, they might have in the 70s. They kind of turned to neoclassical to get out of it. Actually,
well,
like that's the policy that they set.
To finish what I was saying, capitalism, the economy has to keep growing. The definition of capital, right, is self-valorizing value. So you put in money, you turn it into commodities, and then you come back with more money. Now, lately, that has shifted.
You have to analyze
as we've hit the limits of
business cycle
profits on commodities. It's shifted to money, just money to money, which is a new thing. And a lot of these profits are fictitious capital, which might not be as stable in the long term. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, like profits have continued to grow. There's been some growth in the past few decades, but
M&A activity.
But only like it seems a lot less encouraging when you consider the fact that workers' rights, unions, wages, all of this stuff have been steadily eroded over that time, right? And now places like Amazon are starting to hit a wall where they've squeezed workers about as much as they can. So they need to find surplus value some other way. So I think it's really important for people to understand that aspect of it. Also, I think Elizabeth Warren was trolling a little bit when she said she was a capitalist, right? Like she's putting forth her social democratic vision.
But I also have no doubt that most people above the age of 50 consider themselves to be capitalists or pro-market, whatever that even means.
I mean, it's a very unfortunate layover from the Cold War, but
definitely.
It's there.
I know people who are extremely left, like Sandinista solidarity, very broadly socialist to the left of Bernie, that would still, in a certain age bracket, not feel comfortable saying that they're not capitalist. And I'm also, and this is where I just get sort of bored with, like, I don't know. At a certain point, these definitions also can get kind of meaningless. Frankly,
I don't think they're meaningless.
They can. I said they can.
I mean, do either of you think that, like, for instance, the stagnation problem or whatever has any bearing on, say, Medicare for all?
No.
Yeah, because social democracy only works when rates of profit are high enough.
So this is
I think we got money.
We've got money. This is the part that I find. This is where I get concerned when Marxists start to echo the most ultra orthodox neoliberal. Why is that?
In the short term, look.
No,
in the short term, these reforms are obviously what needs to happen. In the long term, I do not believe that they're sustainable, and I think
because you have a neoclassical view of the economy.
What does that mean?
That when you say that the rate of growth won't sustain those programs, that's echoing the most extreme. Like, you could find liberal and moderate classical economists who would not agree with that.
All right.
that
well,
we could
yeah.
sustain. Okay, so you have a very
I'm
within
not all
capitalism
in
you have
for
a,
MMT.
yeah.
We
All right,
can play
Carla,
this
go ahead.
out. Like, we could play out like Elizabeth Warren getting into power, and she promotes aggregate demand from the consumer class in the form of state. Are you still there?
Yep, go ahead, man.
Oh, sorry. So if she gets in, hey, cash cycle of money, give more money to the poor so they can then buy stuff. Business cycle then creates growth. So, and you can also do that in form of state consumption, tax relief, all going to the poor, whatever. This would inherently just create inflationary pressures, which would then only be countered by freezing wages on some level agreed on by the trade unions.
So that's a very neoclassical view. You really think that? Wow. So you actually really think?
Or neo-Marxian.
No, but that's literally like what the argument against the original Syriza plan in Greece was. That's an argument against any types of these types of reforms. That's what every time you hear that on Fox News, they go Zimbabwe or Greece, or at least that's what they used to say.
Where's the inflation?
So that's really what you think?
I'm not against reforms.
Well, no, I just want to be clear. That's what you're saying, Gabe? You think that naturally a byproduct of that is those types of inflation? Really?
Within the capitalist, if you're working within the capitalist society and have a private Federal Reserve controlling that inflation, absolutely.
Wow.
I mean, you're going.
Yeah, I don't think that that's born. I don't think that that's. I mean, there's plenty of examples where that's not borne out. And in fact, the whole kind of big freak out about inflation, even when we had during the early part of the Obama administration, that was one of the main talking points as to why there couldn't be a bigger or second stimulus. And there was nothing even remotely approaching that. And actually, maybe this is where, I mean, I'm not super excited about MMT, to be blunt, because I'm for ideological reasons more interested in, as I keep saying, democratizing parts of the economy. But maybe this is where they would be a good read up on, because there's literally no evidence in decades of these dynamics playing out this way, whether it's in Scandinavia or here or really any place where people have control of the currency. It's not evident in China. China's starting to shift domestic investment and have a different growth model. It's not evident in the core of the Eurozone. So I'm actually kind of at a loss, and I would really hope that, a certain type of very, long-range Marxist argument wouldn't be used in service of short-term neoliberal austerity. That's very concerning to me. But call back again, man.
Wait, can I just say a few more things? Because we can argue economics all day. It's not a real science. Neither of us really has any way of winning this argument completely.
It's not. I mean, that's just what's been happening. There are some observable things here.
Yeah, well, there are other arguments for why capitalism needs to end, not limited to, but including the environment. Right?
Yeah, those are much better arguments.
The Earth's going to be fine, but we're going to be dead.
Those are much better arguments.
This crisis would not be happening on this level if we were producing things for their use value rather than their exchange value on a market, right? Because now we have a system where you burn whole fields of crops because the market is being weird, whereas they would just be distributed to feed people. We have houses, we have buildings, whole buildings sitting empty while people are homeless on the street. It makes no sense. It's ridiculous. But even beyond that, and I think this is where leftists and liberals really differ. Like, it's not enough. It's not our only goal. It is a primary goal, but it's not our only goal for everybody to have a humane life, right? I think leftists and liberals share that goal. We disagree on how we get there. I also think people deserve control over their lives.
Well, yeah, you and I are on the same page with that stuff.
So,
I agree.
So, like, it's one piece of evidence, and like, I know you want to move on, and we probably should, but in Jefferson Cowie's book about the 1970s, Staying Alive, I was really struck by the labor actions that were starting to bloom in the 70s in a time of relative prosperity still, in the beginning anyway, late 60s, early 70s.
Okay,
We had, and it was depicted in movies like Blue Collar, right? Like we had this like decadent late social democracy. The workers were living high on the hog, according to this movie, right? They had everything they needed to survive. They had unions. The unions were very strong. They were doing very well. And they were still profoundly alienated. And they were striking a lot of the time for more control over their workplace and control over their environments in their lives. And every single time, the bosses bought them off with higher wages. And I think that's what we're seeing now with Jeff Bezos and Amazon.
And I think the other challenge is going to be that's what most people want and are interested in. So,
and especially at that time, that was the headwind, right?
Right.
Like Jimmy Carter's saying, like, I ran Georgia like the best corporate, like the thinnest corporate structure,
right?
And then everyone, like, I think we're leaving that time period now. Like, I think that's where, if you have room for to be hopeful, it's that thing has run a course. I don't know if it's completely run its course yet. It's our job to basically make it that it has, and hopefully people stop talking about how CEO should be president again.
Right. I mean, that's an important cultural shift.
Bottom line, no one should have to work if they don't want to. Definitely no one should have to work for a boss so they can make money off of your work without doing anything. That's just a fact. And there's enough wiggle room if we eliminate profits so that everybody can have a decent life. We can produce things for their use value, for human use, not for their exchange value on the market. And people would work much, much, much less than they do right now. And I don't know how that would not appeal to anyone.
Just make sure you do it well and you do it with passion.
Speaking of exchange value.
Yeah, we would all be living the life of Wyatt Coke.
We could all be making T-shirts.
Following our passion for fashion.
That sounds really disturbing.